Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to another episode of the Iron Life Podcast. I am your host, Chris Tutela, here to help you live the Iron Life. So, just got another sitting done for my tattoo, my tiger sleeve that I'm working on my right arm. My arm is chewed up, man. Every time I go, I'm like, fuck, I hate getting tattooed so much. I love tattoos, obviously, but just hate the process of getting tattooed, and it never gets easier. It actually it seems like it's getting worse. Like I'm getting softer the older I get, which maybe it's good mentally to have to sit through it and endure the agony. Now, I don't want to sound like a little bitch. Certain spots are definitely not too bad, but certain spots, man, like when you're getting Japanese work, there's so much shading and there's like every part of your skin is covered, and some of those spots like in your armpit area, just like on the inside of your arm and the inside of your elbow in here, just brutal. And last night I was in the city getting this fifth sitting done, and yesterday was just all like those spots. Like you didn't get a breather at all. There wasn't like a nice on the outside of your bicep. Like no, everything was inside. Everything was in your armpit, and that's not fun. And I'm hoping we get this done. I got one more sitting booked, and I'm really fucking hoping that we get this done next. I'm going back in 2 weeks, so I'm hoping to get it done. But if not, gotta man up for at least one more sitting after that. And just hope for the best. But yeah, just wanted to share that with you guys and let you know kind of where I'm at, because some of you guys were asking like what this tattoo is and where do I go. So that's where I'm at. And by the way, I go to Chris Garver. He's in 5 Points. He's at 5 Points Tattoo in Little Italy. So he's one of the GOATs, in my opinion. But anyway, what I want to talk to you guys about today is how strength training could be bad for your joints. Because the misconception isn't strength training, isn't lifting bad for your joints, doesn't it fuck you up? And the answer is it could. It could if you do the things that I'm going to tell you today, but it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to beat up your joints. It could actually improve the integrity of your joints if you do it correctly. Sure, there's going to be bumps and bruises, but those bumps and bruises far outweigh the alternative of not training. So it's kind of a no-brainer. But you're listening to the show. I'm sure that you are an active guy or gal who likes to clang and bang. So let's make sure that you don't fuck up your joints in the process. All right? So I kind of have a list here that I just brain dumped in my notes, typically how I do these shows these days. But so there's no particular order, but I will go over everything that kind of just came to mind as far as how people do get injured and bang up their joints in the gym. So the first piece is no warm-up. So you walk into the gym, you're cold, you grab a bar, you go. Okay? That is not going to do anything for improving the health of your joints. In my opinion, and just through my experience, it is, because I know this is like debatable, I don't think that you need a 20-minute warm-up to get ready to train, but I do think taking a quick 5 to 8 minute warm-up is only going to help, where you do some foam rolling, you break a sweat, you increase your core temperature, you lubricate the joints a little bit with synovial fluid, you put your body in some positions with body weight that could help you get into better positions when you actually start to train for the day. So just mobilizing certain areas, doing some soft tissue work, spending 5 to 8 minutes on some type of dynamic warm-up, that is a game changer in my opinion, and definitely should be a staple in your routine. And the older you get, the more seriously you got to take that. If you're an old school meathead, it's like, I never warm up. Yeah, you got to make sure that you start warming up so you don't have to get a fucking shoulder replacement or whatever in the future. Like, take care of yourself and prioritize a good thorough dynamic warm-up, but you don't need to spend all day doing it. Your time is precious, so 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, you're done, you're ready to train. Mobilize and address the areas that you're going to train that day. And if you're doing full body, you could do the same thing. Just go through a full body warm-up. But make sure you get a warm-up in, right? Now, another thing in regard to warm-ups, in regard to warm-ups, once you get to your main lift of the day, okay, or even if it's not your main lift of the day, once you get into training, it's important to take ramp up or build up sets or warm up sets, whatever the fuck you want to call them these days. So many different terms. All right. But people tend to overcomplicate this concept where it really doesn't have to be. All right. All warm up sets is like, say your program is scheduled. Let's keep it super easy today. Your program is scheduled for 3 sets of 10 on an incline dumbbell press. And for 10 reps, you could handle the 80s. Okay, so that's where you're going to start for your first set. But you shouldn't jump right in and grab the 80s. You should take the 40s for maybe 6 reps. Then maybe you take the 55s, take 4 reps or so. Then you take the 65s. Maybe you take 2 reps there. You take 75s for a single, and now you're done. Those are ramp-up sets. Now you're ready for your first working set. Super simple way to do it, okay? There are other ways to do it. For instance, if a set calls for 3 sets of 10, you take a couple of like those sets that I just talked about, maybe 1 or 2, but then set number 1, maybe you do that instead of using the 80s right away, you use 65s, and then you use 75s, and then you use the 80s on the third set. So you could do it like that, but just to give you a general layout, what I typically like to do, the stronger you are, the more warm-up sets you need. So I will say that I like to do the first version of the ramp-up sets that I just told you, but making sure that you are progressing and preparing your body, your nervous system, your joints, your muscles, the connective tissue, making sure that you're preparing everything for those bigger, heavier lifts, right? The weaker you are, the less warming up you have to do, right? There's some people that might be lifting the 10-pound dumbbells. Do you need to spend, 10 minutes on taking ramp-up sets? Not really. Maybe you take the 5s for a couple reps, and now you're good to go. So the stronger you are, the more ramp-up or warm-up sets you will need. So make sure you take that into consideration. So the other thing here is putting the big lift first in your workout. That was an old thing that we always did. Now, I don't think you need to program it last in the warm-up, but if you take, like, for instance, let's stay consistent with an incline dumbbell press. Like, let's say that's your main lift of the day, right? So prior to that, maybe you do some pushing and pulling. Like if you're doing like a full upper body day, like push-pull, maybe we do push-ups and seated cable rows. So now we're bringing some blood into the upper back. We're lubricating the shoulders. We're getting a pump in the pecs. You're now preparing the muscles and especially the shoulders, the joints, the shoulders and elbows for the heavier stuff that's going to come later in your workout now versus putting that first. So if you program that way, that is going to help with the warm-up process even more and make sure you're primed even more for the bigger lifts of the day. Now, listen, if you're a gym owner or trainer, you could even do this in group training like we do it at TTS. We just program I don't want to get into our programming now, but we essentially we have like a power block, then we have a hypertrophy block, and the hypertrophy blocks are usually built around more quote-unquote joint-friendlier exercises prior to their big lift of the day. So we just kind of set it up like that. But so if you're a trainer, gym owner, you're wondering how you could run your sessions like that, it can certainly be done. And if you're just someone who likes to train, then it could definitely be done. It's just a matter of sequencing your program and moving your bigger lift a little bit later in the workout. It's as simple as that. All right. But another thing that will bang up your joints over time is having no eccentric control. So the eccentric portion of the rep is the lengthening portion of the rep. And when I say lengthening, I'm talking about lengthening the muscle, right? It's like the stretch portion. So on a bench press, it's on the way down is the eccentric. On a RDL, when you're hinging and going down, that's the eccentric phase. Most people don't control the eccentric portion. They're just worried about muscling the weight up. So if you're doing that, we're not controlling, you're just kind of crashing into your chest and bouncing, or you're bouncing in the bottom of the RDL, it's going to pull you out of position, and we're kind of just like shock loading your joints, right? So when you do that, of course, that's going to fuck up your joints if you do that over time. We're just trying to put as much weight on the bar as possible, and we're just kind of bouncing it off of our chest, or we're just bouncing the exercise. There's no control. So you're not going to strengthen the muscle eccentrically. Like, we're not training the muscle eccentrically if there's no control. So you could see the problem with that, right? How there's going to be a weak link in the muscle that you're training, right? So there's that, and then there's the bouncing and getting pulled or pushed out of position because there's no eccentric control. So take your time, control the eccentric, usually a 2 to 3 second eccentric. 2 seconds is usually like the standard. You could take it a step further and have a 3, a 4, or 5 second eccentric, but at least 1,000, 2, 1,000, go. 1,000, 2, 1,000, go. Right? That's going to give you a way bigger bang for your buck. You'll probably get a greater strength and hypertrophy response, or you certainly will. And it's going to keep your joints much healthier in the long run. So keep that in mind. Let's see here. So here's another one. I have here going beyond your active range of motion. So you got to think of excuse me, the active range of motion of a muscle. So let's just use a dumbbell press as an example. Like, if I'm on a bench and I'm doing a dumbbell press, my pec has an active range of motion, okay? And once I get to that range of motion down in the bottom portion of the rep, that's as far as I need to go. Once I go beyond that, now I'm getting into that passive range of motion, and all I'm doing is stressing the shit out of the connective tissue in my joints, and my muscle is no longer active. It's now passive. So it's kind of just being forced by gravity into this position, which is just beating up your joints, and it's not really serving you a purpose, obviously, right? So you have to train within the active range of motion of a specific exercise for a specific muscle group versus forcing down into passive range of motion. So you could do that in really any exercise. So you have to know, and that comes with experience, that comes with working with a coach to really know. I can't go down every fucking exercise and tell you where that range of motion ends, but you don't want to force that range of motion. So keep that in mind next time you go into the gym, so you have a better understanding, at least you'll be mindful of it and not try to force down into certain positions. Like, just try to think, like, where am I still active, and now where am I just relaxed and it's just stressing my joint, gravity has just taken over. So try to remain active in those bottom portions of the repetition. All right, and that will help you. Like, for instance, here's one way to do it, like, just for you to get a feel for it. If you were to do a dumbbell press, you're going to come down and then take an isometric hold where the dumbbells are just kind of hovering right above your shoulders, right? From there, squeeze and flex your pecs so the pecs stay active. Like, pull them in towards the midline of your body as you're here pausing for 2 or 3 seconds before pressing up, right? When you do that, you'll be able to kind of feel the pecs working in the bottom position rather than just turning them off. And if once you understand that and you could feel that, it'll help you not go beyond the active range of motion and just kind of force those positions. So play around with that, see if that makes sense. And if you have questions on it, shoot me over a DM and I'll answer your questions. You could even send me a video. I'm happy to help out. Okay. So another thing is using exercises that aren't ideal for your body's structure, and just kind of taking force feeding yourself specific exercises like a bench press or like a barbell squat or like a straight bar deadlift. So some of those exercises are not ideal for your body type. Okay, so here's an example, and it feels like the bench press is like the exercise, the example of the day today. But it's easy to explain. You guys get it, right? I don't want to make this any more complicated than it has to be. So let's say you have somebody with really long arms. They have really long upper arms, the humerus bone, right? They have really like basketball players have really long arms, right? Now, if you're someone who has really long arms like that and you are trying to bench press, and when you're bench pressing, you're bringing the bar all the way down to your chest, because that's how you were probably taught, right? Now, for most people, that's totally fine. But for someone like that who has really long arms, now their elbows are going to be really down low past the bench just to get the bar to their chest. So you could see how that is putting all this extra stress. This kind of goes back to the same thing that I just talked about, but this is in a way that you probably wouldn't even realize just because of your anatomy. So you're coming super low with those long ass arms, and now you're stressing the joints for no reason. So why force feed that exercise? Like, you could use a variation of it that would be better for you. Maybe you get one of the elite FTS shoulder savers and you slap that on the bar, and now you're limiting the range of motion. So again, active range of motion in the bottom, you're not going so deep down past where you should be going. So using a shoulder saver, using like a 2-board or 3-board if you have a partner. Hell, you could even stick a foam roller under your shirt. It's kind of like the Fugazi way to do it. If you don't have a partner, if you don't have a shoulder saver, you could grab a foam roller, stick it under your shirt so it stays in place, and bring the bar to that. Another thing is like straight bar squatting, right? If you're barbell squatting and you got beat up shoulders or really tight shoulders even, and you're reaching back and you're trying to grab onto that bar, it's just putting all that stress on your shoulders instead of simply using a safety squat bar or doing a front squat. And a front squat's another example. Like, sometimes people will like to front squat, but they have horrible wrist mobility and forearm flexibility, but they're still just trying to jam into that position. Like, instead, you could just use like that old school bodybuilding method of crossing your hands, elevating your elbows, keeping the bar in place like that, or taking some wrist straps, wrapping those around the bar, grabbing onto those, and then elevating your elbows. Much more joint-friendly way to do a front squat. So you don't want to force feed yourself those exercises. Another example is a deadlift. So if you're doing a straight bar deadlift and you don't have the mobility to get into the bottom position and maintain a neutral spine, then you shouldn't be fucking straight bar deadlifting from the floor. You could use a straight bar, but pull from pins or pull from mats. A better idea would probably be to use a trap bar with high handles, but you don't want to force these positions. You don't want to force feed those exercises. All right. So that's another thing for you to keep in mind if you want to keep your joints healthy. Now, another big thing here is chasing numbers at the expense of technique, especially you younger guys listening to this show. I know that you're hungry. I know that you want to show off a little bit. You want to ego lift a little bit. I get it. I've been there. Excuse me. But it's only going to fuck you up in the long run, man. You gotta be smart about this. So don't just chase numbers at the expense of technique. And that kind of goes back to like no eccentric control, but there's more to technique than just eccentric control. But you want to really dial in your technique and you want to get as strong as possible with near perfect technique. I don't think it needs to be like every little minute detail needs to be like, you need, I think, honestly, in my opinion, I believe there is a point of diminishing return with trying to like perfect technique down to like the smallest little detail. But it does need to be pretty damn near perfect in order for the exercise to be effective and in order to keep your joints safe and healthy, which is obviously what you want. So once you start overloading the exercise and you're using a weight that you can't handle, your technique goes to shit, and you're just trying to muscle up weight, man, like that's not doing anything for your strength. It's not helping you build more muscle. All it's doing is beating up your joints. So use an appropriate training load and make sure that you are really always considering that strength training is a skill set and you should be sharpening your skills. You should be treating it like it's a sport or a martial art and try to focus on that technique and get as strong as possible with technique instead of trying to force anything, right? Like if you've ever boxed or if you've ever taken any type of martial arts, like when you try to force something and you try to use all this strength, like you're going to get super fatigued. Your technique goes out there is no technique. And because there's no technique, what happens? Like you're just going to get your ass kicked, right? So in this case, you're going to get your ass kicked by the bar, and it might not be an acute or a sudden thing where you get injured, but those long-term, those chronic injuries get sustained, the tendinitis, the inflammation, the micro tears that you're creating in connective tissue leads to a bigger tear in the future. So you got to just be smart about what you are doing and don't just chase numbers at the expense of technique. All right. So another thing that will beat up your joints is using angles or grips that are not optimal for you, the individual. So, and sometimes everybody might fall into the category that I'm going to give. I'm going to stick with we're consistent today. We're sticking with the bench press, or let's use the dumbbell press. But what people will do on a dumbbell press is flare their elbows out super wide, right? So their elbows are at almost like a 90-degree angle, like all the way out wide, and they're coming down. Now, I want you to think of that external rotation that you're placing on the shoulder under load. Your elbows are way out here. The stress, again, that's putting on your shoulders. Now, take that same exercise, bring those elbows in a little bit tighter to your body, closer to the 45-degree mark, and now it's a much better exercise, a much safer and more effective exercise. So you have to use the right angles, the angles that are more optimal and safer. So let's think of a chin-up. Chin-up's a good example here. A lot of people love to do chin-ups for whatever reason. So with a chin-up on a straight bar, you jump up and you got this supinated grip, so your palms are facing you. Now, that alone, like if you have tight biceps, like that alone is really stressful to put on your elbows. So now we're forcing that supine grip. You're in a dead hang position. You're pulling yourself up. Like that is a good way to beat up your elbows, especially now, like if you don't have a great overhead shoulder flexion, if you have those tight biceps, now we're putting the stress on the elbows and the shoulders, and it's a recipe for disaster, especially being tied into that position. Now, if you were to use gymnast rings or angles 90s, now you have the freedom. If I could grab onto those angles 90s and hang from those, and my elbows and wrists could move as and my wrist could rotate, and let's just say I start pronated, and then as I come up, it gets to like a more neutral grip. Like that is way better and less stressful on your joints than just sticking into that fucking supine grip and stressing your elbows. So you have to figure out like what's going to be a better exercise or better angle variation, whatever you want to call it, for you and based on what your needs are. Another thing is if you have poor ankle mobility, and you're trying to squat just, on a flat surface, if you're squatting on a platform or something like that, but you have piss poor ankle mobility, your heels are leaving the floor, your knees are getting more stress placed on them. Maybe for you, grabbing a wedge from what do we use? Prime wedges. Grabbing a wedge, or there's slant boards. There's different tools you could use, but putting some type of angled board under your heels so your heels could remain in contact, that is a better option than trying to force yourself into a squat on the flat ground. So just know yourself, guys. The best way to do it is like through experience, through training, but just taking some notes on what I'm telling you here and trying to figure out the best way that you could apply this stuff to you. Let's see. So we talked about force feeding exercises. Okay. So I would say that those things that I just listed, are the big ones. So no warm up, that's dynamic warm up, then no ramp up or warm up sets, having no eccentric control, going beyond the active range of motion, using exercises that are not ideal to your body, and taking a one-size-fits-all approach, like force-feeding those exercises, chasing numbers at the expense of technique, using angles/grips that aren't optimal, force-feeding exercises. Yeah, so those are going to be the things that really beat up your joints for the most part. Maybe I forgot one or two things, but I know that those things right there are the things that if you're going to take your health more seriously and keep yourself strong and feeling good as you get older and as you continue to train and get stronger, those are the things that are going to take everything to the next level and get you feeling better, which is obviously important, just as important as looking better and your performance, right? So the steps to improve it: start with some soft tissue work and a quick dynamic warm-up. Make sure you're selecting the right exercises for you. Focus on mastering the movement. I mean, slowing down the eccentric, ramping up to your working sets. Also, the sequencing of your lifts, making sure that you place your bigger, more demanding lift on the joints later in the workout so you're a little bit more warmed up. And then focus on your effort, right? Using an appropriate training load, making sure you're progressing properly, and then staying fucking consistent with everything that we're talking about today. That's going to be the way that you see your best results, is staying consistent. Don't train for 6 months and then take 6 months off. You got to train year round. Sure, you might have some built-in recovery weeks if you've been training for a long time, but those weeks, maybe they come every, 9 to 12 weeks or so. And that's for more advanced people. If you're a newbie and you never trained before, don't think about taking a day off. Like right now, you're training your 3-4 days a week, and you're going to be good for the next year. Just go for it. And if you're on vacation, you have to modify, whatever, but you got to start moving. Don't worry about days off just yet. All right, guys. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully that gives you some clarity on how strength training could actually be bad for your joints, and gives you some insight on what you can be doing instead and how to make some tweaks and adjustments. If you like today's show, if you don't mind to take a quick second out of your day to leave a 5-star review on iTunes, just go to iTunes right now, click on this podcast, go to reviews, click the 5-star button. It takes you 2 seconds, and it really, really helps us grow the show and get our message out to more people. So I really appreciate if you do that. And if you have an extra second to leave a written review, that's even better. I read every single written review there is, and I will even hook you up with some TTS gear for leaving a review. So thank you in advance for that. Thank you guys for everything, for listening, for your support. I love and appreciate you, and I will catch you next week on another episode of the Iron Life Podcast. Peace!